Hello, everyone. My name is Amanda King, and I'm the Senior Director of Network Services at Feed Ontario. From our audience here in the studio to those of you watching online, I want to thank you for joining us tonight for our Fireside Chat, Myths and Misconceptions. Last week, Feed Ontario released its 2024 Hunger Report, which revealed that we have surpassed a grim milestone, with over 1 million seniors, adults, and children accessing food banks in Ontario this year alone. This is a 25% increase over the previous year and the 8th consecutive year of growth. These rising numbers have placed food banks in the spotlight and in turn has spurred many questions about what's driving the increase, how food banks are managing it, and unfortunately, a lot of misconceptions too, which is what brings us here tonight. We are very honored to be joined by 4 food bank representatives from across the province to answer your questions directly and shed light on the reality that 1 million Ontarians are currently facing. On that note, I would like to introduce a very special guest, our moderator for the evening, Kat Carter. Kat is a voiceover artist based in Toronto with over a decade of experience in the Canadian radio industry, having worked as a music director and on-air talent for stations like Z95.3, Chum 104.5, and Virgin Radio. I'd like to turn it over to Kat.
Thank you so much, Amanda. My name is Kat Carter. Thank you for being here today. The reason why I chose to participate in this fireside chat today is because I have struggled with food insecurity in the past, and this was when I had a full-time job. So this is something that we are talking about today, and also I voiced a PSA for the food bank earlier this year, which you can hear on radio stations across Canada. So joining me tonight are 4 frontline representatives from food banks across Ontario who each bring a unique perspective on the challenges people and food banks are facing. First, we have Chiara Padovani. She is a social worker and community organizer, and she leads the North York Harvest Food Bank's advocacy efforts in Northern Toronto. When she's not at the food bank, she's building tenant power at the York Southwestern Tenant Union, where they've just won Toronto's largest rent strike. Amazing. And Chiara is a firm believer that change comes from the bottom up and that we're always stronger together. Next, we have June Muir. June is the Chief Executive Officer at the UHC. It's the hub of opportunities in Windsor, and she has pioneered 26 programs and services, including employment assistant programs, skills development programs, and she also does job placement, newcomer programs, and a food rescue program that turns surplus produce into soups that get sent all over the province. Beside me, I have Miles Vanny. He is the Executive Director for the Inn of the Good Shepherd. It's a social service agency serving the Sarnia and Lambton community. They have a food bank, a soup kitchen, a youth and adult shelter, and a rent and utility bank. Now, his innovation and leadership have grown the programs of the inn, including the building of an emergency and transitional housing facility, adding winter coat nights, reduced fare transit passes, school emergency backpacks, income tax clinics, snack packs, and the mobile market. And finally, on the end, we have Robbie Donaldson. He's the Corps Officer and Pastor at the Salvation Army in New Liskeard. Robbie has also managed food banks and directed operations in Kirkland Lake and Timmins. So he is giving us perspective to Northern Ontario today. He provides food programs, street outreach, and spiritual care, and he serves as the Vice Chair of the Tamaskaning Home Support Board, and it chairs the People with Lived Experience team. And he's also a founding member of the Northern Treatment Center. So thank you all for being here tonight, and thank you to our audience who is here today and our audience who is on YouTube. So thank you for those who submitted some great questions today. We are going to get started, and our first question is from Heather from Brantford. She wants to know, we see lots of people drive up to our local food bank in brand new cars. They don't need the service and are just taking advantage of the program. Do you screen people to make sure they are not using the food bank when they don't need it? Robbie, would you like to take this?
How do we know that car is theirs? That would be my question back to you. I just want to tell you that we have to respect the dignity of the clients, and we don't means test. People all have a backstory, whatever that may be. When I first went to a food bank 10 years ago, I drove up in a 2-year-old 1-ton dually. And how ridiculous did I feel needing the service of a food bank? But that, I was in a bad state in my life. This was 10 years ago. I had mental health problems, addiction, alcohol problems, couldn't afford my rent, and really did not know what services were out there. And the fact that I went to, oddly enough, the New Hope Food Bank in Orangeville gave me the ability to realize that there's far more than food to help you pull your life together and make a step out of the situations you're in. So do we refuse them food if they drive up in a big car? No. We simply learn about their backstory. And when we learn about the backstory, then we are able to become less transactional. Here's your food box, meet you next month, that's your appointment, and move towards being a transformational model of food bank, where we're helping people get out of the cycle of poverty that has brought them through the doors.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Robbie. All right, question number 2. I'm going to give it to you, Miles. So many people wanted to know how the recent increase in newcomers is affecting our food banks and government social systems, and whether we're prioritizing helping newcomers over helping Canadians. So for example, Matt from Toronto, he asked, what is being done about reports of international students abusing food banks?
Thanks, Matt. That's a really good question and really relevant, particularly in the last few years where there's been such an increase in the number of international students coming in to our schools, our colleges and universities as the government's increased the accessibility. I think it's pretty key to be aware that that there are some challenges that the food banks face. We ourselves found that in about 4 years ago, when we started seeing more international students come in, very pressed for food. We would be flooded the end of August as they're coming in for the September season. Now, our college in Lambton College in Sarnia, has always had international students coming in. 20 years with international students arriving, and particularly in a partnership with Cesar College here in Toronto. But as the numbers grew, we were overwhelmed. So we had a discussion and started talking to the students that were coming in to understand, because we have a very strong partnership with our college at Lambton. They help us with a fundraiser. We support their school food bank. We have students in placement at all our programs and centers. And we knew that students coming in would be required to have at that time a $10,000 GIC to be able to care for themselves and support themselves when they're here, along with being able to work part-time. But what we were seeing with the numbers coming in, that didn't seem to fit that was happening. So we started having a dialogue with the students. That's always the best way to have a solution, is start talking. And we started to realize in talking to the students that there was a cultural block there. And with most of the students coming in, they were from countries that didn't have a food bank, so they didn't know what a food bank was. All they were hearing was, oh, you could go to the food bank and get free food. Or on these TikTok videos, you know, it really played up the fact that go to your food bank, you get good food. We started talking with the students, and when we explained the purpose of a food bank, that it's not for those that don't want to spend money on food, it's for those that don't have the money to spend on food. And then you could see an immediate reaction from most of the students that they were really kind of horrified, and a number of them used the term, this is very dishonorable for us to be coming here. They did not realize what that basis of the food bank was, and once they realized that it was a need-based, they started pulling back right away. And that dialogue really became important. So we worked with the college and their international department so that because we realized it was education that was the key factor there. So we started going to the orientation sessions. Our college, Lambton, does a 2-day orientation session for each new cohort of students coming in. So we present to them about, being in the community, about volunteering, about being active in the community, and what supports there are if that's needed. And we again talk about food. The food bank is for those that don't have the money for food. And we've seen the number of students come into our food bank now really drop off, and really it's those that have dire circumstances or their circumstances have changed. So that's been a very effective way for us to be able to meet that challenge, educate people, and that partnership with the college and that education component with the student has really kind of cleared that issue away for us.
All right, and just a quick question about that. Now, is this happening all over Ontario or just at your college in your particular area?
We've had that success at Lambton College in terms of how we resolved it. A lot of colleges, particularly ones that are engaged in bringing international students in, we're seeing, seeing that increase in students. And I think it's important for them to, build that relationship with their college, have that dialogue with the students and the college, be involved in the orientations, and I think that will solve a lot of the challenges and issues.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Miles. I know that was a very popular question. So question number 3, we are going to give this to June, so if you could pass the microphone over. We have heard a lot on the news about labor shortages. Work is often seen as the solution to issues like poverty and homelessness. So Laura from Jordan asks, why don't food bank visitors just get a job?
So food bankers do want a job. We do have a food bank, and sometimes it's not that easy. There's many challenges that they face. So tonight I want to ask you to put yourself in this situation, and I'm going to share a story of a client who went through a very challenging time. And I think if you can imagine and walk in his shoes, you would understand why it's difficult just to get a job. So we had a client that had a job, but he couldn't get there. He lived in the county, his car broke down, he lost his job. He came to us and we were able to put him in a pre-employment program, but we lost contact with him. So our job coach actually went to his house, and it really wasn't a house, it was a trailer. And we learned that he had no water, there were rats in his trailer, and he had no transportation. So it was devastating. So we had a shuttle at the time. We were able to get him on the shuttle, get him to a place to get a shower. We were able to get his hydro back on. We have a Keep the Heat program. We were able to get him a job, and we were able to help him. But imagine all the challenges that he had. And it wasn't that he didn't want to work. It doesn't happen overnight. If it wasn't for the passionate staff that we have, I don't think an individual would get that kind of help. But we have a lot of agencies and a lot of help out there. It's just letting people know that it's there. And once they know, they can access that help, and we help them find a job. Another example is single parents. Single parents have children at home. They have to take a bus to get to a minimum wage job. If their child is sick, they have to leave the job, take the bus to pick up their children. It's not easy. And try and maintain the home, balance, the children going to school, pay the rent. It's very, very difficult. There's many challenges. So sometimes they're not able to keep that job. But it's not that they don't want to work. They want to work. Some people have mental health issues today. Some live with them for the rest of their life, but they have to work. So we have a job developer that works with employers to job carve so that the employer has an employee, because there are labor shortages, and the client's able to work. And our job coach will go on site and make sure everything is going well for that client. So there's so many reasons, and I always say to people that ask me that question, come and visit our center. So if you're near a center, visit, ask those questions, and I think that will give you the answers that you're looking for. And I think it's important that we recognize that people do really want to work. It's just so challenging. So I hope I've answered that question, and I'll give it back to you.
All right, thank you very much, June. All right, the next question is for Chiara. Around half of people who use a food bank in Ontario rely on social assistance, Ontario Works, or the Ontario Disability Support Program. Now, food banks frequently call upon the provincial government to make improvements to these programs, such as raising the rates or reducing clawbacks. Now, however, some were concerned by this call, such as Mike from Ottawa, who asked, if we increase welfare, won't that make people reliant upon it, not want to work, and cause generational poverty?
Yeah, thanks, Mike, for that question. I know that there's a lot of myths and misconceptions about our social assistance system and the folks who are using it. And of course, it doesn't help to have those misconceptions perpetuated in the media and by some of our elected officials. So it's easy to believe things about people on our social assistance system that are simply not true. And the first point, there's 3 points I'm going to want to try to make, and I'll try to wrap up my comments without blabbering on too much. But the first thing is, you can't really rely and live on social assistance because the rates are just so low. In the sector, we call this legislated poverty. And that's because the ODSP, we call it ODSP, it's known as the Ontario Disability Support Program, that would need to be doubled just to meet the poverty line. And on Ontario Works, a meager $733 a month, that would need to be tripled to meet the poverty line in Toronto and in this province. So just to start off, the rates are far, far, far too low to be able to live on comfortably. And in fact, you really can't. $733 doesn't pay for rent, doesn't even pay for a room in a house in Toronto. So people are not really relying on this system or depending on it or being stuck in it because they want to or because they're lazy. It's really because this system has been failing people for so long. And the second point I want to make is the social assistance system as it is right now punishes people for a lot of things, okay? It punishes you if you're trying to save money. It punishes you if you're trying to work. If you work too many hours or make too much money, it punishes you there too. It punishes you if you have a child in your household that is got a job in high school. It punishes you if you are living with a partner. Heck, the social assistance system in this province punishes you if you got evicted or if you're homeless. In every single one of those scenarios, that $733 gets reduced and in some cases taken away entirely. So this is a system that is actually so flawed that it traps people into this cycle of poverty, but not because people are lazy, not because this is what they want to live on, because it simply isn't enough. This is a system that is trapping people into it and making it impossible, literally making it impossible for people to get ahead. So that's my second point. And then finally, you know, social assistance in Ontario hasn't had a real increase since the 90s. Man, I was like 3 years old the last time social assistance actually had a real increase in this province. And so when food banks, when we're advocating to increase social assistance rates, to fix these problems, to reduce these clawbacks that are just trapping people in a program that is failing and is so, so cruel, it's because we know that half of the people coming through our doors in this province are relying on social assistance, and it means every year they're getting poorer. They're more poor than the year they were than last year. They're more food insecure. They're more hungry than they were last year because those social assistance rates are not going up. They have been frozen for a very long time. And we know, of course, that the cost of living and the cost of everything else is going up. So folks on social assistance now are actually getting $200 to $300 to $400 less today than they were when social assistance was first cut by 22% in the 90s by the Harris government. all right? So when we're advocating for this, it's not because we want people to just live the freeloader life on social assistance. It's because, my friends, it's impossible to live on social assistance right now. And so I'll just make a plug for a campaign, because the York Southwest, or the North York Harvest Food Bank, where I work, we have joined and reinvigorated the Raise the Rates campaign. And what we're asking for is for the government to at least double and peg to inflation the social assistance rates. And you can show your support for those demands by going to raisetherates.ca. You can sign the petition. It'll send a message to our provincial government to really get those rates to at least closer to that poverty line, so that fewer and fewer people need to turn to the food bank and rely on food banks to make ends meet. And it's our social assistance system that has been failing for so long that's leading to 50% of the folks coming through our doors being on social assistance.
Wow. Okay, so that's Raise the Rates.
raisetherates.ca. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Excellent. That was a lot of great information, stuff that I had no idea about. So thank you so much for that, Chiara. The next question, I'm going to give it to you, Robbie, because it's a little bit about Northern Ontario. Now, as we know, Ontario is a very diverse place, and a lot of times the discussions talk about how tough things are for people in big cities, like here in Toronto. But as we saw in the Hunger Report, food bank use is rising everywhere. So Pete from Bowmanville wants to know, how do needs and demographics differ from city to small town settings, or northern versus southern Ontario?
Yeah, that is a terrific question, and it fascinates me. Where to begin? The needs don't differ at all. The needs across the province are the same, and the statistics show that. All of the information going into the linked feed database system, which is used by food banks across Ontario, records the same information. So when we see an 18% of new visitor rise across the north, that equals 18% on the 401 corridor. That's page 9 on the Hunger Report count. And approximately repeat visits is going to be around the 23% mark in the north, and down in the south, hey, 23%. So the needs are the same. People can't eat. They're making the choice, pay the rent or eat. Now, how do the demographics change? Well, they change dramatically. I think you live in Bowmanville, city of 45,000 people, maybe 15 kilometers across the city. One food bank in the district of Temiskaming I oversee has reach from V-Town on the Quebec border, 100 kilometers to Matachewan. Someone coming from V-Town to the food bank in Kirkland Lake has to travel 40 kilometers. There is no public transport. So that would mean they have to pay a $100 round-trip taxi fee to pick up a food hamper. It's not possible. So public transport is huge in the north that we don't have. There's one bus a day north, one bus a day south. So you couldn't even get a job half an hour away from where you live because you can't get there. So demographically, the circumstances are different. In the north of the district where I live, district of Temiskaming, 32,000 people, 13,000 square kilometers, huge. The North Strip is mining, and the mining is like this. And as I said, V-Town earlier, great example, town of 1,500 people. Hey, guess what? They don't have a grocery store, let alone a food bank, let alone public transport, because the mines that did mine there, and that's how the town developed, they're gone. Yet in the south, where I am, in New Liskeard, we have the same thing. It's an east-west 100-kilometer strip that we service. So people have to rely on their neighbors to get them into the food bank. They have to rely on their neighbors to get them to health appointments. They have to rely on family, neighbors, friends to get them around. Transportation is huge in the north, which debilitates people from getting ahead in life, from getting jobs, from accessing food banks, or even just accessing a store to buy food. Another difference we see in the demographic is the First Nations population. So if I were speaking about Timmins in the district of Cochrane, they have, let's put it this way, the homeless population is over 80% First Nations. That reflects in the food banks as well. And that is reminiscent or caused by the 50 scoop and the colonization. Those effects are still evident very much in the north. We don't see that, I don't think, so much in the south. Of course, there's pockets. Bowmanville is on, I forget the treaty name, but certainly it's on native land. So the native population face extreme hardships. They're still living in James Bay, around Hudson Bay area, James Bay. There's no roads in there except in the winter when they can go on an ice road. And hey, they don't even have fresh water in their houses. Like, this is Canada 2024, folks. So without food and without water, how are they expected to live and thrive? You know, so the demographics are tougher. There is less jobs. In Kirkland Lake, there is jobs in mining in the north part of our district and the south part of the district. There is farming. There's some forestry work. That is work that's very demanding. That is work that when you work in those jobs, you don't have a 34-hour a week and a half-hour lunch break. Sorry. You work in farming, you work in forestry. I just, as a minister, married a couple the other week, and that guy, the reason he got out of being working in forestry is because he lived in his truck in the bush 5 days a week and never got to see his family. So demographics are really, really different in the north than in the south. Big north-south divide, unfortunately.
All right, Chiara, next question is for you. So unaffordable housing is a big reason why people visit food banks, particularly the high rents. So 2 in 3 food bank visitors have less than $100 left after paying for their housing costs. So Barbara from Welland wants to know, how can we reduce rent costs so that people have enough money to get through the month?
I love this question. Like you said in my introduction, when I'm not working at the food bank, I'm a volunteer at our local tenant union. And so we know how connected housing is with food insecurity. And when we at North York Harvest Food Bank, we're trying to turn our food bank into a catalyst for change. There are immediate needs that we're all trying and working our best to meet, and that need is getting higher and higher and higher, just like our rents are. But what we did was we did a series of consultations with everyone coming through our doors, and we asked them, hey, what's the number one issue why you have to come to the food bank? And everyone said, with a vast majority, that it was the cost of their rent. So, you know, this question really hits the nail on the head. And before I discuss how we can actually reduce rents and make life more affordable for the communities we're serving, I want to start by addressing one of the myths and misconceptions about the housing crisis that is being really, really perpetuated these days. And that is, we're hearing that this housing crisis is being framed as an immigration problem. And I just want to be really, really clear. The cost of your rent, the cost of my rent, has absolutely nothing to do with what country your neighbor is from, and everything to do with the massive real estate giants that are jacking up our rents, and our provincial government, who is not only letting them do that, but actually making it easier for them to do so by removing the protections that tenants had in the past. And so that's why at the North York Harvest Food Bank and with Feed Ontario, we've joined the Fair Rent Ontario Coalition. And that is a group of organizations, food banks, legal clinics, community service organizations that are demanding and fighting for bringing back real rent control. And we're fighting for three things in particular, and this is the tip of an iceberg, that is this housing crisis that we're seeing today. But those three things are bringing back rent control for every unit in this province, regardless of when your home was built. If you are a tenant in Ontario, you deserve to have security of tenure. You deserve to know that you are not going to be kicked out or evicted out of your home next year because your rents are going to double. All right? So that's the first thing. Regardless of when your home was built, you should be protected by rent control. The second thing that we're fighting for is the complete elimination of above guideline rent increases. What the heck are those? Those are the ways that landlords can skirt around rent control in order to raise rents above what the government sets should be the guideline for those buildings that are protected by rent control. And then finally, and this is a really, really important one, is we've got to bring back vacancy control. And vacancy control means you pay what the last tenant pays. It means that your rent in between tenancies, your like big corporate landlord can't say, all right, this tenant was paying $1,200, they moved out, and now now the new tenant's going to be paying $2,600. That vacancy control is a policy we had before in Ontario. When we had the housing situation under control, we had every single one of those policies. And over the years, those policies have been eroded, and most recently in 2018, we lost rent control for new buildings. And in our network in North York, we see, like, our members and our member food banks, they see what happens when an apartment building comes in where there's no rent control. Like, people come to the food bank and they say, my God, my rent went up $100. Where the heck is that? My income's not going up $100 every month, you know? But people are facing rent increases as high as 10% in our neighborhood. 10%. Who gets a raise of 10%? So what does that mean for people? It means that's coming out of their food budget. It means more people are relying on the food bank because more of their earning, more of their income is going to just keep a roof over their head. Here's the thing about those three things, all right? Bringing back rent control, removing this above guideline rent increase loophole, and actually bringing back vacancy control. Here's the thing about those things. They can happen in a second. It requires nothing but political will to put in those policies. It doesn't cost the province a cent. It doesn't cost the province any money. They can go in like this. So the only thing that's missing is political will, and that's where all of us come in, right? Because we can sit here and scream and say, oh, the government should do this, the government should do this, the government needs to do this. We've got to be the ones holding our governments accountable. And so I'm going to plug another one, Kat.
Go ahead.
The Fair Rent Ontario Coalition has just launched their website. Like I said, Feed Ontario and North York Harvest are members. You can go to fairrentontario.ca and send a message directly to our provincial government to ask them to reinstate rent control and bring back rent control for everyone. And that will have a dramatic impact. You know, at food banks, we talk about how much money people have left over for rent. And the latest report says most people have $100 left over from rent after to pay for food. If your rent goes up $50, if your rent goes up $100, you don't have that money left over anymore to buy food, which means you're relying 100% on your food bank to meet your food needs. So controlling our rents and getting this housing crisis under control is hand in hand with helping our food banks keep our work under control, because you can talk to anyone on this panel. We're going to tell you, man, it's getting harder and harder and harder, because we know that it's getting harder and harder and harder in our communities. So go to fairrentontario.ca, send that petition out, let our provincial government know that you're backing rent control, because it is a direct link between how many people will go hungry every night depends on how much their rent is increasing every year.
And Robbie, you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, if I may,
Absolutely.
sorry, bringing that northern perspective again, we have a transition house in Kirkland Lake, a 6-bed male transition house, and our pass-through rate is 25% to graduation. People out of homelessness into housing, into employment. That is 5 times the national average. However, we now have a bottleneck. There's no apartments to move into. There are none. There's no housing stock. Not only that, when they do go to move in, a 1-bedroom apartment is $1,200. Now that sounds pretty low compared to Toronto, but it's $733 a month on Ontario Works. Do the math. That's where food banks come in and back up. Sorry.
No, thank you so much. Okay, next question. Miles, I'm going to give this one to you. So we've heard a lot about the difficulty food banks are experiencing in meeting the need. So Jody from Sudbury asks, don't food banks receive government funding?
Thank you. Thanks, Jody, for the question, because that's one of the myths. I think everybody thinks, well, the food banks get funding from the government, so why can't they meet the need? There is no base funding for food banks from provincial or federal governments. We did get some funding significantly, and thankfully during COVID, when that was the huge emergency, and there were like thousands and thousands of people, hundreds of thousands losing their job, the government stepped in to provide funding for that. But once COVID was over, that funding stopped. So there isn't any base funding. Food banks can apply, like any organization, maybe for some grants, a capital grant to maybe get a freezer or that sort of stuff, but nothing for that to kind of day-to-day operational. Now, municipally, local governments may provide some funding to their local food banks. Those local governments are responsible for social services, but it's not consistent across the province, either in who gets it or whether they get it, or also the amount. So that's kind of a hit and miss. Some municipalities provide food bank. In Sarnia, we don't provide or receive any funding for our food bank. So we're reliant totally on grants or community fundraising and community donations to fund that. So that's the challenge, because what we're seeing, what all food banks are seeing, is an increase in the number of people coming into the food bank, 20 to 25%. But the double-edged sword is that we're also seeing a decrease in the food donations that are coming in, because everybody's feeling that squeeze on their food budget. When they're going grocery shopping, before they would pick up a few extra things, leave it in the barrel on the way out the door, and that would go to the food bank to help. But now families are struggling to have that few extra dollars after they're done their own grocery shopping to be able to put those few things in there. So most food banks are seeing a decrease in the food coming in. So that's the challenge. More using the food bank, less dollars less food and donation dollars coming in, as we all feel the challenge of inflation. I'd suggest what we're really seeing, though, is the result of what's that expression? You're paying for the sins of your fathers. That and you've touched on it. 25 years ago, federal and provincial governments stopped funding affordable housing. And so while our population continued to increase, and as the gap of affordability, as the poverty in our country grew, there was no housing being built. There was no affordable housing being built. And that's really helped start this crisis that, along with the other challenges Chiara said, are making the rents now so totally out of touch for so many people. The other thing is, as was also mentioned, the cut in social assistance rates. So people are receiving less now than what they were getting 20 years ago. So what we've really seen is the government has abdicated its responsibility for caring for the most vulnerable people in our communities. And they've left that to the communities, to the food banks and that. Our food bank in Sarnia started in the early 80s. It was Reaganomics, it was a recession on, and the thought was, as in most communities, we'll have a little food bank to help get people through the tough times, and then we won't need it after that. But the government's institutionalized food banks. They've made us a part of the fabric of our community, and they've been able to step back by saying, well, we'll just let the food banks look after it. So that's, when we say, oh, governments are funding the food bank, we should be able to do everything that's needed.
they're not, and they've exacerbated the situation and the circumstances we're facing. And more particularly, they've made it worse for those in our community that are struggling.
So the number one topic that we received questions on was regarding long-term solutions and ways to advocate for them. So Steve from Forest says, is this crisis ever going to ease, and what is required from the government to assist long-term?
If 1 million people in this province, one of the wealthiest provinces in this country, are going to food banks now, this is not individual failures. You are not alone in this burden that you're carrying. And so what I always say is that if you're not alone, then you're stronger together. And when we work together and when we fight together, and you know, food banks started as this, right? The food banks started as groups of neighbors coming together to push through and get through the recession because they couldn't rely on, you know, the economy to pull them out of it, right? So we're no stranger to this idea that coming together means we're stronger together in the food bank history. But we've got to do the same thing now at holding our governments accountable, at making sure that they can't get away with freezing social assistance rates anymore, because doing that brings in they're going to bring in another 1 million new people into our food bank system by continuing to scrape away and tear away at our social security net. And then it's us, right? It's the food banks that are trying to do our best at catching the folks who are falling through. But I'm telling you guys, those holes are getting really, really, really big. And anybody in the food bank sector is going to tell you it's going to take more than a donation to our food bank. And heck, you know, the previous question was about doesn't the government fund food banks? I don't want the government to start funding food banks. I want the government to start funding the policies and the programs that we had before that mean food banks don't need to be here in the first place, right? We need to double those social assistance rates. We need to raise the minimum wage. We need to eliminate this wave of precarious labor that's taking over our province, because like June said, more and more people who are working are coming to. It's the fastest growing population of people coming to the food banks right now, are people who are working. What does that say about the labor and working conditions of people in Ontario? That even if you have a full-time job, you cannot afford to pay the rent and pay for food. Those two basic necessities. What does that say about the wages that people are being forced to work and the conditions that people are being forced to work on? So yes, we need to raise the minimum wage. We need to eliminate this precarious working conditions. We need to double social assistance rates. We need to bring back rent control. And those are all things that our government, not only, guys, and this is I want to drive this home, not only is it possible for this to happen, but every single one of those things have happened before, right? This is a systemic degradation of our social security net that has been happening for decades. I mean, really since I was born, right? And so we think now, people come today now 30, 40 years later, and they're like, oh, that seems impossible, rent control or vacancy control or social assistance rates that you can actually afford to rent an apartment on. That seems out of this world. But it's not out of this world. We had them before. We didn't have people lining up at food banks as just like it was just another thing in part of their week, right? That wasn't normal. We're making it the new normal, but we can't let this become the new normal. So to answer that question, I'm gonna get off my soapbox, and I'm gonna say it takes you who are listening, you who are volunteering at food banks, coming into food banks, donating to food banks. It takes you to continue, of course, that support, because like we've said, we're at a breaking point, right? The seams are coming undone of our social security network and our food bank system. It takes all of those things, but it takes demanding change too, because this is unsustainable. So I would call on everyone. I gave you 2 concrete petitions you can go and sign today. And if your local food bank or your local organization isn't already signed up to these coalitions, Let's get them signed up. Tell them about it. Say, hey, this coalition's working for rent control. This one's working to increase social assistance rates. These are the real solutions to the food and security crisis that we're facing. And we've got to become those agents of change. So get together in your communities, organize within your food banks and your local community organizations to demand that change, and make it loud. Make it loud, make it impossible for you to be ignored, because that's the only way that change has happened, and it's the only way that we're really gonna make this. Who's going next, Miles or Robbie? Robbie?
2 seconds, back to Miles. So number one, in the housing solutions that are coming through, we see it through HPP and Reaching Home. People now have a system where they can get help with first and last month's rent. They can get rent subsidies. And how are we going to get that? How are we going to get government to revamp the system and look at it differently? If we all come together, as Chiara is saying. We got to look at it different.
I think we've got some real structural issues in our society that we need to work with, things that have been happening for the last 20 years, and we've talked about the loss of some of the vital rent policies that were taken away to give benefits to the big corporate sectors and that. You know, we've talked about employment. You know, 10 years ago, the majority of Canadians were employed in full-time jobs, good paying jobs with benefits, but as corporations started to see that full-time jobs cost them more, they've gone to hiring part-time. Part-time means minimum wage, means, you know, uncertain hours, means no benefits. And so that's why we're seeing so many more working people come into the food bank, because they have to make those gut-wrenching decisions. Somebody in our family is sick, we need medicine. Well, do we get the medicine, or do we pay our rent, or do we buy our food? And no family should have to make those kinds of choices that put members of their family at risk. So those kinds of structural changes, it's easy to say we want the government to put money into it. Yes, we need affordable housing. We need the government to help provide funding for affordable housing, because there are agencies prepared to build, you know, affordable housing. But, you know, it isn't just money, because no politician wants to spend money, wants to raise, you know, taxes or you know, set aside money for things that aren't necessarily as popular. But if they were to reintroduce some of those policies that were there before, that would make a huge impact on how we're going to, you know, provide housing for people. You know, it seems bleak right now. We have more people using the food bank. We have more people homeless. We have more people that, you know, can't afford basic necessities for living. But I also have a bit of hope, because I hear in our community and other communities, I hear more talk now than I've ever heard about we need to deal with, you know, helping people make sure there's no food insecurity. We need to help house people. And that's becoming a conversation in a lot of communities. And when that becomes the buzz, and people speak louder, then our MPs and our MPPs, they have to listen. Sign the petitions, that's really important, but also talk to your MPP and your MP, because they're the ones that are making those votes. They're the ones that are telling their party, here's what I'm hearing, and they don't want to be unpopular. And if they're hearing a lot of voices saying, gosh, you know, we need some food security, we need rent security, that may prompt them to say within their own party, we've got to look at differently. It's not just about government pouring in money, it's about how do we manage and be creative in the solutions that we can legislate, and often at no cost, so that we can make life better for most in our communities.
All right, so as Amanda noted earlier, in the 2024 Feed Ontario Hunger Report, which you can read at feedontario.ca, it's right on the homepage there, very easy to find. Over 1 million seniors, adults, and kids visited a food bank in Ontario this year, a 25% increase from last year. So we need you. This is your call to action. Donate. If you can't donate, that's okay. You can donate your time. Whatever you can do to help out, that's okay. So Amanda King, let's get back to you.
Thank you. On behalf of Feed Ontario, I would like to thank our moderator, Kat Carter, and our food bank representatives, Chiara Padovani, June Muir, Miles Vanny, and Robbie Donaldson, for joining us tonight. I'd also like to thank the Pro Bono Group for connecting us with Kat Carter and Archipelago Productions for producing our discussion this evening and providing us with this beautiful space to gather. Finally, I would like to thank our audience, both here and online, for joining us this evening. We truly appreciate your time and the very thoughtful questions you submitted to our panelists tonight. If you would like to learn more, to find your local food bank, or to make a donation, please visit us at feedontario.ca. Thank you again, and we wish you all the best this holiday season. Good night.